Hey everybody, this is Dream, and happy Thanksgiving to everyone. We have a four-game college basketball slate that starts at 7 o'clock tonight, and this slate is pretty interesting. All four games have relatively tight totals, and all four games are within a 10-point matchups, so that does give some upside. With that said, there are some injuries here. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? It really does help the channel a lot. I really do appreciate it. I also want to note that I do have some sportsbook picks today. Iowa at 3 p.m., Creighton at 4 p.m. at -9, Arkansas money line at 5 p.m., and then the over/under for the BYU Arizona game, taking the under. And then for college football, I actually have Ole Miss -10 in that game. So make sure to check those picks out today. With that said, make sure to also check out the YouTube memberships, as you'll get the college basketball DFS picks daily. I've been starting to add college basketball, NBA, and other sports picks to things as well, so check that out. You'll get those every day, and you get NBA write-ups each day as well. For college basketball, what type of entries you enter actually does make a pretty big difference here. I want to talk about that for a minute. The low entry games, like single entry GPPs, are definitely the most favorable so far this season. The cheap GPPs, like the 10 cent and 25 cents, are not bad to throw lineups in either. But I'm mostly avoiding 50-50s and double ups, as the lines for them have been very inconsistent and all over the place. And there's not great projections anywhere usually. So especially with injury news being kind of inconsistent and not always available. With that said, that could be an issue today. So let's get into the slate. We have four games. I'm just going to go through each game here and talk about each one. So this Michigan-Stanford game is the highest scoring game on the slate, and it's also one of the tightest at just 3.5 points. There's 148 total on this one. This game definitely has some guys that we can pull from it. And so we'll talk about that. I think this game is going to come down pretty close. So if you were going to go over and under, I would take the over in this game, as both teams have some good scoring potential here. And I do like Michigan slightly, but I'm not betting on Michigan on this one because I think it's going to be super tight. With that said, let's get into plays on this team here. So we're going to start with um, with Michigan here, and we have quite a bit to like here. As from the starting roster, they're going to be relatively tight with their rotation likely, and Burnett is going to be a great. Michigan here. Burnett's going to be a pretty decent option today. He is a GPP play on the slate, as he has had some bad games this year. He definitely needs to score in double digits to pay off. He's done that 3 times in the 5 games he's played, and if he doesn't score double digits, he has not scored any fantasy points hardly at all. So that is important for him, though he does get some assists and rebounds that is helping as well. And he's priced pretty fairly here. He's got really good upside if he can have a good game from the scoring perspective. Looking at Doug McDaniel, his scoring has been the best on the team, and if he's scored over 20 fantasy points so far this season, he's been blasting through 5x at this price point. He's one of the better high expensive options on the entire slate, though he does carry some risk as his low floor in the mid 20s so far this year, and he's hit that a couple of times. His price is also boosted up, which is annoying, and I don't typically like to pay up for guards quite as much, so he is a GPP play, but he's capable here. Then we'll look at Olivier. I don't know how to say your name. I'm sorry, from Michigan. He is pricey here as well at $9,000. But he's been pretty solid so far this season in 4 games, over 30 fantasy points. Obviously, with the price point, we want him to get a little bit more than that, but the fouls have actually been an issue in 2 games, which has limited his fantasy points. And the 2 games where he didn't have foul trouble, he scored over 38 or better, and that will be good for this particular slate. So I do like him here, though he does have some risk if he gets into foul trouble early. I do think this is going to be a high-scoring game, and if he can get a double-double, he'll definitely pay off, though. Then we'll look at Terrace Reed, Jr. from Michigan. Now, he's been very low floor this season, and he's playing around 20 minutes a game as a starter. He's priced slightly higher than Burnett was, who I already mentioned. I do think Burnett's a little bit safer than he is, but his rebounding has been pretty good in the 3 games he's done well in, and he does need to rebound well to pay off here. He's not as scoring dependent as some of the others, but he does need to get some blocks and rebounds to pay off. He is high risk, though. He's definitely the higher risk than Burnett on the slate. Terrence Williams is the other starter, and he's pretty avoidable on this one as he's really not done a lot fantasy-wise to be helpful here. Moving into the Stanford team here, we're going to look at Jared Bynum. Now, he's pretty much the only guy that really is matchup proof and has somewhat proof of the fact that Angel and Jones are both back. Now, I'm going to keep in mind that Stanford did play yesterday afternoon, much later than expected, and that was a triple overtime game against Arkansas. So I am a little concerned that they're going to be tired. Most of their guys played in the neighborhood of close to 40 minutes. But Bynum is the safest option on this team if you want to go with somebody from the team, and he also does get some peripheral stats like assists and rebounds as well. And so that gives him a little bit of a boost from the fantasy aspect. Even if he doesn't score a ton of points, he's still capable and is a pretty good price on this one. Some of the other options on the team, like Angel, is in play, though he did get into foul trouble early yesterday and didn't play but 29 minutes. And so there's a little concern there. Plus, he was back for his first game after a couple of misses. And so he has got some viability, but he does come off the bench. Um, if he can stay out of foul trouble, he could be in play on this slate as well. Some of the other guys, the minutes are kind of going to be inconsistent as now with Angel and Jones back. That does hurt Stokovich and Reynard and Jones a little bit. So, and they're all priced up some. Let's move into the Boise State Virginia Tech game. Now, this game has a very tight game at only 2 point spread, and so I do kind of like this game from that perspective. However, I don't expect that it's going to be as high scoring as it does have a 140-point spread total, but there wasn't a ton to like from Boise State as they all seem very overpriced. Most of these guys seemed a little bit scoring dependent too, which is probably going to be a little bit harder in this game. That said, it is a game that there should be some scoring, so I think the forwards definitely have some more potential in this one for Boise State. But I do think the probably my favorite play from the team is Omar Stanley, who's their sixth man, as he's going to have some capability in this game, but he definitely carries some risk. And this is probably the lowest scoring game on the slate, aside from that night game with BYU and Arizona State. Looking at Virginia Tech, I have several guys I like from this team, and my favorite play on this entire slate is Lynn Kidd for them. He's been very solid so far this season. His price is fair. He's had some really big fantasy point games as well, with 44 in one game. Now, this game does have a tight spread, but if we look at the game against South Carolina, which was the only real tight game that Virginia Tech has played so far this season, he had 25 fantasy points, and while that's a little bit less than what we'd like today, he's very capable of doing a little bit better than that, and so I think he's going to have a potential for that at least. I think that's basically his floor for today, and so that makes him a great play. Even though his prices come up some, he's still in play as a great option on the slate, and he's played well. He should get more minutes today as well with the game being tighter, and that gives him some potential on this one. Then we're going to look at Padulia for Virginia Tech as well. Now, he's had a very bad floor the last two games, but both those games are kind of blowouts. I don't expect this one to be quite as much of a blowout. He hasn't rebounded all that well in those two games either, though. And one of those games he did have some foul issues. But I do look for him to have some upside in this one, though he does need to hit some threes to probably pay off here. He does feel like a decent option, though, so I think he's probably capable of a top tier game. If he can score at least 15 or so real points, then I think his floor is good enough to be viable on this one, especially in a game that should be relatively tight. Though I want his shooting to improve from the last two games a little bit. Then we're going to look at Tyler Nickel. He is the sixth man for this team, and he is the de facto sixth man. In fact, he's played 20 minutes off the bench all three games he's played. He didn't play in one game, but the one middle game there you see against South Carolina, he did not do well. He only scored 2 points, but he doesn't have much. He doesn't have a lot of usage from the perspective of scoring. So he does carry some risks there, but he does seem to make things happen. And in the first game of the year, he did get a bunch of rebounds. He does feel a little bit scoring dependent, but I do think he's capable of a 10-point game. And if he can get 10 points and then get a couple other stats, then he could definitely pay off here, though he does carry that risk. And the GPP, extreme GPP play, as he definitely doesn't get enough other stats to be super warranted, and he does have that super low floor. Moving into the North Carolina State Vanderbilt game, this one does carry some interest here, as it should be a somewhat higher scoring game on this one, though there is some concern about some of the both teams with possible injuries and guys coming back and things, especially for Vanderbilt. As for NC State here, Woods remains out, and so that actually bodes well to the rest of the players. So I do like Jaden Taylor here, as he's played pretty good so far this season. His price is not terrible here, though it is higher than I would like it to be a little bit. He has a high ceiling. He just has a mid-level floor, and if this game is similar, I think to the last two games that he's played, he does tend to be a little bit scoring dependent, as he's not getting a lot of peripheral stats, but he could definitely get over 20 to 25 fantasy points in this one, and if he can get to 25, then that would definitely be viable here. However, he does need to play at least 25 minutes probably to get there. And if this gets out of hand, which it could because Vandy's had some struggles, then that could be a problem. However, Vandy might get some guys back today, so that could help. We'll also look at Diarra for North Carolina State. Now, he has a low floor, as his minutes are very inconsistent, but he's had close to double-double in two games, and he didn't really play enough minutes in the third game, which was a blowout. All three games for them have been somewhat lopsided, so his minutes have been somewhat limited, but if he can get in there and get enough, get over 20 minutes, then he could probably pay off at this price. But the minutes are really the big concern here, and so that does carry some risk, but he's a definite play here on this particular slate. Moving into Vanderbilt, there's some concern on what the starting lineup might be today if Lawrence or Lubin come back. And Lawrence actually posted on X of him as Christian Bale's Batman. Maybe he's back today. If so, he could be an option. But I'd like to hear some info about minutes from the coach. That said, he's definitely a viable play if he does play and has full complement of minutes, though he's going to have to do a lot to keep them in this game. So keep that in mind. I do like Manjon for Vandy as well, as he's played very well so far this season, scoring a lot of points. Granted, they've had a kind of a rough and tough season. They've kept all the games close so far, and he's played in the mid high 20s to low 30s in most games. He hasn't gotten a double double with rebounds, which is or assists. So, but he's capable of that sometimes. I think he's going to have some upside in this matchup. If he can get at least 15 real points, then I think he'll do enough peripheral things to pay off. And with the high total, I think he's going to have that potential in this one. But he does carry risk because of his team being lopsided and having some injury situations. Looking at Colin Smith, he also looks pretty interesting today. He's rebounding the ball very well so far this season. I am concerned about the spread here, as the four games that they played so far were relatively tight, and he got, pretty consistent minutes, right around 30. That said, he does have some potential, and he's been one of the better consistent players that they've had, especially from a rebounding perspective. If he can stay out of foul trouble, too, that would definitely benefit him. But am concerned a little bit about the blowout potential, and the scoring for him has been inconsistent on the season, so he does have a somewhat low floor, but his price is still okay and definitely a viable option here. If we ever hear anything about Lawrence or Lubin for sure, then that would definitely help us determine players on the slate. Obviously, if you look at the opponent rate here on DraftKings, there's some concern there, as North Carolina State has been decent uh, uh, from that perspective. And if we look at their, the games that they've played, they've been kind of lopsided games, but they really haven't played anybody great yet. And so that, that is a little bit of that. So I don't think you should be too scared about that opponent rank so much today. But I do think Vanderbilt does carry some risk on this one. And then we're going to look at the BYU Arizona State game. Now, I do think this is going to be the lowest scoring game on the slate. I'm a little surprised that the total is up over 143 right now, so I am taking the under on this game myself. BYU has played very well. They're a very good defensive team as well, and so that is a concern for if you're an Arizona State fan or if you want to pick them to win the game, even though it's a 10-point spread with BYU's favor. BYU plays a pretty deep rotation. In fact, when I went through their team, of their five starters, there was only one guy that plays over a consistent amount of minutes, and most of the others are playing a lot total minutes. And so we'll look at the guy that I do like that's a starter, which is Noah Waterman. Now he does have a very low floor, as again you can see his minutes in the mid 20s. Everybody on this team feels like this. He does definitely has the best ceiling of the guys on this team. But as you can see, all four games that they've had, except for the San Diego State game, have been kind of blowouts. And I do think that they're going to have a little bit tighter game here. I do think it's going to be lower scoring, but he definitely has some potential. His price is okay. He doesn't, you know, he reminds me of a Michael Porter Jr. type of play when it comes to fantasy, where he's got a high ceiling and a low floor. Um, if he can get the rebounds and stuff, that would definitely help. Then we're going to get to three bench players for BYU who have played very well so far this season. Jackson Robinson is one of them. He's been oddly consistent. It's going to be really hard to figure out how to play this slate because of this team, as he is very scoring dependent, but he has played well, and he's playing around in the mid 20s in minutes. If we look at the San Diego State game, he actually scored 23 fantasy points in that one as well, and his price was almost as similar, and so that does give me some hope for him, though he didn't play as many minutes. He does need to play enough minutes and hit a couple threes to pay off here, but he's definitely capable of that. Richie Sanders here is also in play as coming off the bench. He's been relatively consistent in the mid 20s in minutes as well, and his usage has been good in those minutes. He's scored around 20 fantasy points or more in each game so far, and he has some potential in this one as well. But again, he comes off the bench, so do keep that in mind. And then Hall for BYU. Now, he hasn't been as consistent as the other two that I mentioned here off the bench, but he's also playing, you know, a decent amount of minutes off the bench, somewhat inconsistently, but he's getting more assists and rebounds than some of the other guys, and so that gives him some upside. And if he can get in some double-digit scoring, that would really boost him as well. He's cheap enough that he's a viable option, but he does carry a little bit of risk here. All of the four guys that I mentioned for BYU are GPP plays. I felt like all the other four starters are a little bit pricey, considering the fact their minutes are a little inconsistent, and this game does have a little bit of blowout risk. But BYU's playing well, and Arizona State, while they are a good defensive team sometimes, they are carrying a lot of questions, and they've got some more injuries piling up, and they definitely haven't played particularly great so far this year. Just to look at the games that they played here, now Phillips is out today, but in the three games that he's played, they haven't scored a ton of real points. So, and even though that they've won two of the three, it's been a relatively tough start for them, and their minutes are also kind of all over the place. There are some guys that get plenty of minutes for this team. They're a little bit overpriced, and they've got a really tough matchup. And I am taking the under on this game, so using anybody from this game does carry some risk, but it is the late game, and so maybe one or two guys from this team is in play on this one. With that said, guys, this is an interesting slate. It should be a fun one. Hopefully, everybody has a good Thanksgiving. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.